Okay, next is 34.2, which is glands of the endocrine system. So the endocrine glands are scattered throughout the body, many of them with no apparent connection to each other. And so how does the body control and regulate so many separate organs so that they can act together as a single pattern? Remember, we talked about the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the parathyroid, the thymus, the adrenal, when we were doing ID, the pineal, the thyroid, pancreas, ovaries, and the testes. Okay, so what are the functions of the major endocrine glands? Well, the pituitary glands secrete hormones that directly regulate many body functions or control the actions of other endocrine glands. The hypothalamus controls the secretions of the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands release hormones that help the body to prepare for or deal with stressful situations. So insulin and glucagon produced by the pancreas help to keep the blood glucose levels stable. And the thyroid gland has a major role in regulating the body's metabolism. The gonads serve two important functions: the production of gametes and the secretion of sex hormones. The human endocrine system regulates a wide variety of activities. So the major glands of the endocrine system include the pituitary, the hypothalamus, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid glands, and the reproductive glands. So the pituitary, it's a bean-sized little structure that dangles on a slender stalk of tissue back at the base of the brain. And the gland is divided into two parts, the anterior and the posterior. Anterior being front, posterior being in the back. Some of the hormones released by the pituitary control other glands, while others affect their types of tissues. So next is the hypothalamus, which is attached to the posterior pituitary in the link between the central nervous system and the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus controls the secretions of the pituitary gland. Okay, next, the activities of the hypothalamus are influenced by hormone levels and other substances in the blood and by sensory information collected by the central nervous system. So the hypothalamus contains the cell bodies of neurosecretory, I can't say this very good, neurosecretory cells whose axons extend in the posterior pituitary. Y'all know I massacre words sometimes. So hormones are made in the cell bodies of the hypothalamus and stored in the axons entering the posterior pituitary. So when the cell bodies are stimulated, the axons in the posterior pituitary release hormones into the blood. The hypothalamus has indirect control of the anterior pituitary. It produces a specific releasing hormone that controls the secretion of each anterior pituitary hormone. And hormones released by the anterior pituitary gland are listed in a table in your book that you can look at. You'll see like the follicles, what we call FSH, when you look on test results. That's your follicle stimulating hormone. And the action on that is to stimulate the production of mature eggs in ovaries and sperm and testes. And your book will have a whole chart for you to take a look at. Next are the adrenal glands, and they're the little pyramid shape that sits on top of the kidneys. So the adrenal glands release hormones that help the body to prepare for and deal with stress. And the outer portion of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal cortex, and the inner part is the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal cortex produces more than 24 steroid hormones called corticosteroids. And the heart-pounding, anxious feeling that you get when you're excited or frightened, commonly known as the fight or flight response, is produced when impulses from the sympathetic nervous system stimulate the adrenal medulla to release large amounts of epinephrine, which is adrenaline, and norepinephrine. So epinephrine and norepinephrine increase the heart rate and your blood pressure. They also cause air passageways to widen, allowing for an increase in oxygen intake and to stimulate the release of extra glucose. And epinephrine, just like we talked about my EpiPen, that's what it is. That's what it does. Okay, the pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions. As an exocrine gland, the pancreas releases enzymes that help digest food. So the hormone-producing portion of the pancreas consists of clusters of cells that are called islets of Langerhans. And at their discoverer, German animist is who they are named after. So the group of light-colored cells is an islet of Langerhans. Y'all can make fun of me saying that all you want to. So each islet includes beta cells, which secrete insulin, and alpha cells, which secrete glucagon. So insulin and glucagon help to keep the blood glucose levels stable, as shown in the feedback loop. And when blood glucose levels rise after a person eats, the pancreas releases insulin. Insulin stimulates cells to make glucose out of the blood, preventing blood glucose levels from rising too rapidly and ensuring that glucose is stored for future use. So insulin signals the liver and the skeletal muscles to store glucose as glycogen. And in fat tissue, glucose is converted to lipids. And when the level of blood glucose drops, glucagon is released. And it stimulates the liver, the skeletal muscles, the fat cells, and it causes the fat cells to release glucose into the blood. This helps to raise the blood glucose level back up to normal. When the body fails to produce or properly respond to insulin, a condition known as diabetes mellitus occurs. The very high blood glucose levels that result from diabetes can damage almost every system and cell in the entire body. That's why diabetes is so dangerous. Type 1 is an autoimmune disorder that usually develops before the age of 15. The immune system attacks beta cells, resulting in little or no secretion of insulin. So people with type 1 diabetes have to follow a really strict diet and get daily doses of insulin to keep their blood glucose levels in control. Type 2 most commonly develops after the age of 40. Type 2 diabetes produces low to normal amounts of insulin, but their cells do not properly respond to the hormone because the interaction of insulin receptors and insulin is inefficient. So now let's talk about the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. The thyroid gland is located at the base of the neck, and it wraps around the upper part of the trachea. And the thyroid gland produces the hormone thyroxine, which increases the metabolic rate of cells throughout the body, causing cells to become more active, use more energy, and produce more heat. So iodine is needed to produce thyroxine. So low levels of thyroxine in iodine-deficient infants produces a condition called cretinism, in which neither the skeletal system nor the nervous system will develop properly. So iodine deficiency usually can be prevented by the addition of small amounts of iodine to table salt or other food items. If we were actually in class and we had more time, I could show you some really cool history stuff that goes along with that. If the thyroid produces too much thyroxine, a condition called hyperthyroidism occurs. Hyperthyroidism results in nervousness, elevated body temperature, increased body pressure, and weight loss. Too little thyroxine causes a condition called hypothyroidism. This is low body temp, lack of energy, weight gains are also signs of this condition. Gout, an enlargement of the thyroid or gouter, can be a sign of hyperthyroidism. The thyroid also produces calcitonin, a hormone that reduces blood calcium levels. Calcitonin signals the kidneys to reabsorb less calcium from filtrate, which inhibits the calcium's absorption in the small intestine and promotes calcium absorption into bones. So, calcitonin's opposing hormone is the parathyroid hormone, which is released by the 4 parathyroid glands located at the back surface of the thyroid. So, the parathyroid hormone increases the calcium levels in the blood by promoting the release of calcium from bone, the reabsorption of calcium into the kidneys, and the uptake of calcium from the digestive system. The gonads, which are the ovaries and the testes, are the body's reproductive glands. The gonads serve 2 important functions: the production of gametes and the secretion of sex hormones. In females, the ovaries produce eggs and secrete a group of hormones called estrogen. In males, the testes produce sperm and secrete the hormone testosterone. So, how are the endocrine glands controlled? Like most systems of the body, the endocrine system is regulated by feedback mechanisms that function to maintain homeostasis. Okay. All right, next let's talk about maintaining water balance. So the hypothalamus contains cells that are sensitive to the concentration of water in the blood. So as you lose water, the concentration of dissolved material in your blood rises. And the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland to release a hormone, an antidiuretic hormone. ADH is what we usually just call this for short, is carried by the blood to the kidneys where it slows the removal of water from the blood. Got to scroll my book up here just a second. So this causes your body later to experience a sensation of thirst. And when you take a drink, most of that water is quickly absorbed into the blood. And when the water content of the blood rises, the pituitary releases ADH. So less ADH causes the kidneys to remove water from the blood. The blood is then restored to its proper concentration. A water deficit stimulates the release of ADH, causing the kidneys to conserve water. And an excess of water causes the kidneys to eliminate the excess water as a component of urine. So the controlling metabolism. The activity of the thyroid gland is controlled by the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. So when the hypothalamus senses that the thyroxine levels are low, it secretes the thyroxine-releasing hormone, TRH, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete the thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH. So TSH stimulates the release of thyroxine by the thyroid gland, which inhibits the secretion of TRH and TSH, and it stops the release of additional thyroxine. This feedback loop keeps the level of thyroxine in the blood relatively constant. So the hypothalamus is also sensitive to temperature. So when the core body temperature begins to drop, the hypothalamus produces extra TRH. And the release of TRH stimulates the release of TSH by the anterior pituitary, which stimulates the release of additional thyroxine by the thyroid. So thyroxine increases oxygen consumption and cellular metabolism. The increase is in metabolic activity, helps the body to maintain its core temperature. Okay, we'll go on to the next section.